It's no secret that the next guy on the list falls into the category of sports villain. When you're included in the group dubbed the Bad Boy Pistons, it's sort of baked into the cake. Here at the AJC, we're counting down the top 12 sports villains that the city of Atlanta is not fond of. And this next guy was notorious for beating up the competition in more ways than one. His battles against Larry Bird might be a little more famous, but his hard fouls on beloved former Hawk, Hall of Famer and current broadcaster Dominique Wilkins, those hit close to home for Atlanta. Our number 10 villain in Atlanta sports history is Pistons center Bill Laimbeer. Joining me now is our AJC sports columnist, Mark Bradley. Mark, how does Bill Laimbeer epitomize the perfect Atlanta sports villain?
I don't know that Atlanta has exclusivity on Bill Laimbeer being hated, because he was pretty much hated every place he went. He was. You mentioned the Bird and the Celtics, that Johnny Most, their announcer, dubbed Bill Laimbeer and Rick Mahorn, his sidekick henchman, as McFilthy and McNasty. So I mean, they were pretty much awful everywhere, and they reveled in being despised. But the Hawks had become a good team in the middle of the '90s. They had Dominique Wilkins, Doc Rivers, Spud Webb. They were entertaining, they were fun, they were good, and they were in the same division as the Pistons. And in '86, they had played the Pistons in the playoffs and had beaten them. Wilkins had a 50-point game without a dunk, if you can believe that, because he was being not guarded by Kelly Tripucka. But the Pistons changed their team after that, and they became much meaner, and the Hawks could not get past them after that.
I was going to say, it seemed like for a while there, the Hawks and the Pistons, maybe there was a little bit of a rivalry, but the Hawks couldn't quite get over that hump for a while.
They met them in '87, rematch the year before, and the Pistons then had John Sally and Dennis Rodman. They had added them, and they had gotten rid of Kelly Tripucka, and they also had McFilthy, McNasty, and Isaiah Thomas, and Joe Dumars. So they were really a tremendous team. But they still had to get past the Hawks, because the Hawks had finished ahead of them in the Central Division that year, and the Hawks had the home court advantage in the playoffs. But Pistons won Game 1 here. It was tied going back to Detroit for Game 3. That was the game where Bill Laimbeer laid out Dominique Wilkins when he went up to shoot. That was typical stuff for Laimbeer, but Hawks fans remember it. And then in Game 4, Isaiah just went crazy at the end. And so they came back here up 3-1, and they won Game 5 here, and that was the end of the Hawks, who were then known as Atlanta's Air Force. They were a team that we had thought would go maybe to the Eastern Conference Finals, maybe even further than that, and the Pistons just took them out. And you kind of hated the fact that they lost, but you really kind of hated the fact that it was the Pistons that they lost to.
Nick has gone on the record about how Laimbeer was a guy you did not want to play against.
Well, they all hated, they played each other so often in the regular season that they just were sick of each other. They got sick of each other, and all the games were, there was never one where you say, boy, that's a good, clean fun going on. They were just beating each other to death. And sometimes they got fouls called, and sometimes they didn't. And that definitely played into what the Pistons wanted, because the Hawks were kind of a smooth running team. They liked to run. They were very fast, and they could jump out of the building, as we know, with two
contest winner, Dominique Wilkins.
Two slam dunk contest winners with Spud. And but they, the Pistons kind of roughed them up and beat them, it brought them down to their level. And then the Pistons went ahead of them in the pecking order in the East, which was very heated at the time, because the Celtics were there too. It was the Celtics of Bird that the Hawks would lose to in '88. And then after that, here came Michael Jordan and the Bulls. So, the East was just totally loaded, and the Hawks were kind of the team that got pushed by the wayside. And the Pistons were, they eventually won 2 championships, and they trademarked or copyrighted their Bad Boys, and they sold their Bad Boys T-shirts as they were winning the championships. So they enjoyed it, and they won it their way, and everybody else pretty much hated them.
What was it about Laimbeer's playing style, the way he went about it, that got under the skin so much of, us in Atlanta, but it's not unique to just Atlanta.
Well, if you looked at him, you could tell he wasn't exactly a finesse player. I mean, if hitting people if every time you touched another player was a foul, he would have been out of the game in 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. But he was at a time where guys were he came along at a time where you were able to beat up the other team. And
a very different era.
Yeah,
it
is. He did a lot more than hand check, which hand checking is now illegal. But the Pistons were, they took great pride in that, and they everybody hated Isaiah too, because everybody, he would smile, and he was a great player, but everybody thought he was a phony. I remember Steve Holman, the Hawks announcer then, and now,
still doing radio,
saying once, Isaiah, we see you with your phony smile out there. So it was just they were impossible to like, especially if you had to play against them.
Mark, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks to all of you for watching. Make sure you continue to follow along as the AJC counts down our top 12 villains in Atlanta sports history.